Let me start by pointing out that his two major works dealing with religious matters are his dialogues concerning natural religion and a natural history of religion. The dialogues are really about natural theology, the viability of the classic arguments for the existence of God, ontological, cosmological, teleological. And the thing is cast in the form of a dialogue with three characters who represent, of course, three different positions. One of them somewhat skeptical, one of them sort of Lockean, and one of them something of a Platonic mystic. And therefore you get a very vigorous kind of debate. I don't want to go into the details of the argument. There's some comment on it in Stumpf, and you can explore it more fully if you want to in Copleston. I think it needs to be said that this is a full-scale critique of the claims of natural theology, a critique of the arguments as such. There's no theological objections to to doing it that way. The objections is that the arguments don't work. The premises don't logically produce the conclusions. And from Hume's day until this, I think it's fair to say that there has been a mainstream in philosophy of religion which is agreed with that assertion, that the arguments are not sufficiently complete, conclusive, clear enough to prove the existence of a first cause, a rational designer, supremely good, and so forth. Now, that's not to say that the arguments don't have any weight at all. In fact, Hume himself, in the last section of the dialogues, admits that, yes, they do have considerable weight, and he seems to think that Cleanthes's position is the one he's most inclined to agree with, because of the kind of impression, and impression is the word in Hume's technical sense of it, because of the impression that the orderedness of nature, predictability and so forth has on us. So that from a rational, logical point of view, while the case is by no means clear, logically complete, it's not demonstrated, we don't have demonstrative knowledge of God, as Locke said, yet there seems to be something there which might evoke belief. Now, the dialogues are concerned then with the logic of belief. But the natural history of religion is concerned with the psychology of belief. And if you like, you can see the relationship between those two as established in the first section of the inquiry concerning human understanding, where he distinguishes between abstruse philosophy, with its attempt at logical proofs, and practical philosophy, the sort of things people live by, you see. And he intends this to be represented by the distinction between the logical arguments of natural theology and the psychological basis for belief, which he develops in the natural history affair. And just as in the first section of the inquiry, he says that what we need really is some combination of the two. So he seems to be saying with regards to matters religious. Notice what I said about the conclusion of the dialogues. They're dealing with the logic of the argument, but at the end he seems to appeal to the psychology of belief. You see. The logic sort of helps you to get clear about where you stand, although the psychological coercion that's involved in belief doesn't come from the logic. It comes from elsewhere. So the natural history of religion then is dealing with psychological factors that contribute to belief. He has the view that monotheism developed historically out of an earlier polytheism. Belief in one God developed out of a prior belief in many gods. And that, I think, because he finds polytheism easier to explain in terms of some natural psychological development. Because after all, as human beings, we have many different concerns common to all of our lives. We need to eat, we need food, we need some sort of security, peace, and so forth. So that we have a variety of emotions, dimensions, areas of emotional life. And there are aspects of our experience within the world of nature which are likely, therefore, to leave impressions, emotional impressions. Impressions that give rise to the notion of a cause, a being, who is doing this. And so a variety of such concerns, such impressions, a variety of gods. Polytheism is a natural psychological development. Monotheism only develops, however, when the rational, the contemplative, comes into play. And reflecting on many gods and so forth seems to give rise to some unanswered questions, possible problems. Because contemplatively we recognize that nature has something of an ordered unity about it. Contemplatively, we recognize this. And so we come to think of one being behind the ordered unity. You know, that's the sort of line of thought that the pre-Socratics went through in metaphysics. Why is the one ultimate rather than many? You see. So he sees that. In the dialogues, on the other hand, when the teleological argument gets to talking about the ordered unity of things, the response that Hume introduces through one of the other characters is, but it's our idea of a unity that's involved. How do we know there is that actual unity? It's we who combine the various simple ideas into the complex idea and get a unified world, you see. But while logically you cannot prove then the ordered unity of the world, you just know the ordered unity of your idea about the world. Complex ideas are not the originating ideas. While that's the case, yet psychologically, it's still the fact that reflection on that tends to move us from, accordingly, that historical development. Monotheism, he feels, as simply a rational conception, a speculative notion of natural religion resulting from natural theology. Monotheism, in that sense, isn't going to affect the imagination and produce those impressions, feelings, and consequently monotheism is likely to give way to some kind of a polytheism. You see. Now, historically, how do you get polytheism subsequent to monotheism? He is suggesting that the psychological train would naturally lead there. I think, in effect, what we have is rather monotheism as it loses its vitality, giving rise to what I'd call a secularistic polytheism. That is to say, a secular society that has its gods. Its god of money, its god of sex, its god of power, you'll see. That sort of thing, a loss of any unified worldview. But in history, the fact is that while natural religion cannot long activate the life, what is needed is that there be some historical account of that one God active in history. Hume says that. And obviously he is referring to the Christian story of God active in history and the incarnation. So his point is that religious belief is produced by things that happen in human experience historically and in everybody's experience that arouse emotions, impressions that give rise to ideas about the cause of what's happening. So, a psychological account of religious belief. In the process of all of that, what Hume has done for the history of thought, the philosophy of religion has been working with for the last 200 years. Namely, the concern to reconstruct theistic arguments that are indeed valid. The attempt to reconstruct theistic arguments. Discussion as to what sort of a God does natural theology point towards. The problem of evil, much more than previously. Because one of Hume's objections to the teleological argument, arguing from the ordered purposefulness of nature, is that evil represents dysteleology, lack of order, or at least lack of purpose, discernible purpose. And so the problem of evil came increasingly into focus. The relationship between reason and emotion in religion, obviously a crucial question. And that includes the question of the evidential value of religious experience, arguing from religious experience.